Tech by Tips.
Hello and welcome to another Tech by Tips video. First of all, I want to give a thanks and a shout out to two people that donated to the channel in the past week, and these are Brian Messon and Hugo Manguse. Thank you very much for your donations. They're really appreciated. You're rock stars. Thank you very much. And now we're going to be working on this second part of the video request from last week, which is the application named Whisparr, and that comes from Raging Bull. So we're gonna go ahead and carefully tread on this video, because this is an application that is kind of sensitive, because it is an application that, if we scroll down here, it says it's an adult movie collection manager for Usenet and BitTorrent. You can find this in github.com/Whisparr/Whisparr. And if we come here, we can see that I'm not surprised actually that it has 159 contributors. That's a healthy amount of people working on this application. And it's on R, mainly written in C#, a little bit of JavaScript, TypeScript. And basically it works like Sonar and Radar and LiDAR. It fetches content from Usenet and from torrents, but this content is just adult content. So the same thing as Radar, but for adult movies. And basically it here tells us that, it is able to add the movies with a lot of information like a trailer, rating, etc. It works on a bunch of different operating systems, and you can watch for better qualities in the movies, so it's able to upgrade the quality of what you have downloaded. It can do failed download handling like the other applications do. It integrates with torrent and 7zbd. It is able to search for RSS feeds, and it recognizes different types of the movies, if it's a special edition, a director's cut, etc. So as you can see, it's very similar to the other R's that we have worked with. The only difference is the type of content that it focuses on. And we're gonna go ahead and set this up then. In our case, we're gonna go again in a Synology NAS, so we're gonna be creating a Docker Compose file for this. So I'm going to provide that to you. I want to make a note here. I've already updated the reference guide repository in GitHub, so I added a lot of other stuff that I missed from previous videos. So I'm going to be adding this one there too, so that should be in the description below. So that's where you get access to the Docker Compose file that I'm going to be creating. So let's get ahead and work with this. Important thing here is if we go into Docker Hub, we're not going to find a Linux server image on this. So the big one here that we can leverage comes from Hot.io. So Hot.io/Whisparr is the one that we're going to be using. And if we go here, then basically it tells us that documentation for that is in that website. And if you need anything, you can pull it from there. So that's where we're going to be using this image here. And he has it for ARM and regular Linux. So that's perfect. It works for us. Whether we're using just regular computers or maybe Raspberry Pis, it's going to work for us fine. So now, what do we need? Alright, just like with our other R's, we're going to have to set up folders to hold our configuration, and we also need a folder for our content. So basically we're going to mount two folders to the container. One is going to be the root of all our media, and the other one is going to be where we're going to put the configurations. So let's go into the NAS and let's create that. Let's go into File Station, and in here in the projects, I'm going to create a new one for Whisparr, and that's perfect here. That's where the Docker Compose file is going to reside. And then I'm going to go into the containers, and I'm going to create another folder for Whisparr, and in here is where our configuration file is going to reside. And again, if we have the mount point where we have our downloads and the process media, we're going to go into the media, and then we need to create a folder here in media that is going to be for that. So let's name it something like adult. So this is where the content is going to reside. So those are the things that we need right now when it comes to the folder. So now let's create the project. So I'm going to go and create a new project here. I'm going to name it Whisparr. And I'm going to select that path for the project that I just created here. And I'm going to say create a Docker Compose file, and let me paste my Docker Compose file, and then we're gonna see it later in a bigger screen. So next, don't start and done. And then we have Whisparr here. Now we can see this in a bigger screen. So here it tells us that we're gonna be creating one service that is gonna be the Whisparr container. And it's gonna be using the hot iod/Whisparr, the latest tag of that image. We're gonna name the container Whisparr. And here for the environment variables, I'm gonna put my time zone, which is America, New York. The user ID, I'm going to use the default first administrator for the NAS in Synology, which is 1026, and the group of that user is 100. If you're using something else, you have to figure out what those numbers are, so you have to SSH into the NAS and run the ID command to get those values. And then we need to map those volumes that I was talking about. The config is going to be something that we have to specify here, so let me get this in the configs, properties, and then we copy this path because in my lab the path is different. So then I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna replace that, and there we go. Volumes docker configs Whisparr, and the HTPC, in my case we're gonna go back into there because that's the root of our content. So we're gonna say properties, and it's volume HTPC, which I believe is the same thing that I have here. So that is right. We're mounting the two folders. You remember that the left side of the column is on the NAS, the right side is how you see it in the container. So that means that /config in the container is going to mount to that directory in the NAS, and /HTPC in the container is going to mount that. And now we're going to expose it on port 8092, and the container listens on 6969, so I'm going to leave that as it is. And then I want to put a limit of 1 GB of RAM that it can use, and that should be good enough for it. And then I'm going to say we restart the container unless I go and manually stop it. And now we should be able to then go save this and build it, and then it's going to pull that container, it's going to build that container and start it up, and then we'll be back when that is done. Alright, it tells us that it exited with a 0, that means everything was good. We can close this, and we got the notification here saying that it was built successfully, so we can clear that. Now we can go into the containers and then click on the logs to see what's going on, and we can see that it's setting itself up. So it's working on the database. Remember, these type of containers usually use a SQLite database, which is a file to hold the database, and then it has to do configurations and stuff like that. So we have to kind of keep monitoring this until we see that it says now listening on that port. When we see that, basically the application is running, and we just see that it stops updating stuff here. So now it should be ready, and if we go here, we should be able to refresh and see files in the area where we said that we were going to hold the configuration. Here's our database, like our SQLite file for the logs, and our SQLite for the actual configuration of the application. And we have the logs and everything here, so everything is looking good. Now, I should be able now to go into the IP of the NAS, and we said we're going to be using port 8092. So I'm going to go into IP of the NAS :8092, and then it loads here the user interface for the application Whisparr. And it is going to look very familiar to you because it is exactly like the version that we see on the other R's like LiDAR, sonar, and radar. Now here we specify things, so I'm going to say use the login page, and then we need authentication, and I'm going to say that this is going to be Whisparr, and I'm going to put Whisparr again as the password. It's for the sake of the video, you choose something else, and then I'm going to say save. And once that is set up in the system, then we should be able to then log out and then log in using that Whisparr. And there we go, it is working. We are able to log in, and now we just have to basically configure this application. As we can see, we don't have anything, so we're going to go into the settings, and then we're going to start working on all of this stuff here to get it working. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into the media management section, and we're going to say rename the episodes. And then this is the example of how it's going to be renaming stuff. You can change this however you want, right? So let's remove the quality. I don't like to have the quality in the name, so that is fine for me. And then replace illegal characters, that's fine. And then here where it says unmonitor deleted folders, I'm going to check that. So if I delete something, I want it to not try to download it again. Now the root folders is something that we have to set up. So we need to click here where it says root folder, and then we're going to look for the HTPC, and then we're going to go into media and then adult in our case, and that's going to be the root of all the content for this application. So all the files are going to be stored there. We can save these changes. All right, and now we can continue to the next section. If we go into the profiles section, I honestly do not make any change here. It basically already defines the typical profiles that you're going to get in the content. So in this case, you have, like, 720, 1080, or just 1080, or just 720, or standard definition, or virtual reality, or ultra HD, and all that. So I just leave it alone. I don't mess with it. That tends to work fine. Then on the quality, also you can change this if you want to be very specific about the sizes and the quality of the content for each of the categories that you defined before. But I honestly always leave stuff like this on the defaults. Now we can go into custom formats, and in custom formats I usually don't do anything either, so I'm not going to do anything here. Then for the indexers, remember that we get all of this from Prowlar. So for this, what we would have to do is we just add a connection in Prowlar to Whisparr. So that's something that we're going to be doing later. And then we need to connect the download clients. So that is something that we need to do. So for that, we need to get here, click on the plus, and then we're going to be using SABnZBD, for example. And we need to specify all of this, and we need to get that from those containers. So let me make sure that those containers are running, and then we can pull that data from there. Or actually, I'm just going to pull it from Sonar. So let me make sure the Sonar is working. All right, Sonar is working, and I have just logged into Sonar. So I'm going to go and copy that data from Sonar and put it just here, exactly like I want it. And basically this is the IP of the NAS here, so I'm going to put that there. Then the port that we specified for Sonar previously, for SABnZBD is 8081. I'm not using SSL. We need to get that API key. Oh, I thought I could copy it from here. So then I need to get that from the application. So let's do the username, which is SABnZBD. The password is SABnZBD. And then the category here, we need to make sure that we also create a category for that. So let's name it adult. And let me see what else I have here. Force. All right, so let's do that here. Force. Okay, in this case, priority force and force. And then this is checked, so this is looking good. Let me start SABnZBD to get that API key, and then we test the connection to that. All right, we're here in SABnZBD. I went to general, and in general, we'll see here the API key that we need. So I am going to copy this API key here. I'm going to put it here now. And then now we should be able to test if it can connect to it. So test, the category does not exist. So we have to go here into SABnZBD, and then we have to create that category here. So we're going to go here and say adult. And then we're going to say that this is force, and this is delete. And then the folder for this is going to be adult. And we're going to say the application is Whisparr. Oh, actually, let's say, yeah, this is the folder path, so adult, and then the category is Whisparr. So then we add this, and now we have the category here. So now let's try this again. And there we go. We got the check mark. Everything is good, so we can save this now. And now we have to do the same thing for Qubit Torrent. So let's go click the plus. We're going to go here into Qubit Torrent, and then we're going to start populating all of this again. Let's go into our Sonar and leverage that for this to make it faster. So put the name, put the IP, the port is 8080, so that stays the same. And then we're going to put the Qubit Torrent as the username and the password. And here the category is going to be Whisparr. And then basically here the initial state is going to be start, and the priority and all that, I'm just going to leave it like it is. We don't need to check any of this, and then we can test, and there we go. We got the check mark. We can save this, and now it tells us that both downloaders are correctly configured here. But remember, we need to do a mapping That's why we have this section that says remote path mapping. This means that Whisparr needs to know where those containers see the files that they drop, so that then you can go in there, grab it, and then move it where it needs, right? So I mounted the root of our directory of the media, so HTPC, to all of those containers. So that's what we're going to be using as the root for our mapping, and let's do it this way. So I'm going to go click the plus, and then we're going to say on the IP of the NAS, the mapping is going to be /HTPC, but then remember inside there we have the downloads folder, and then we have completed, and then in here we're going to have adult. Let's validate that. So we go downloads completed, and then here we need to create a folder named adult. Or actually, let's put the name of the application, because that's what I was doing for all of this. So let's say Whisparr. So let's change that here into Whisparr. Perfect. Now we need to make sure that is in the downloader, so in Qubitory and 7ZBD. But that is exactly the same here in our application. So we can validate that by going here, HTTPC, downloads completed, and then Whisparr. So you can see that we're mapping the exact same path in both places. That means that it is going to be able to pull those files successfully. So we save this. Now we see it here mapped properly. And then there's nothing to change because it automatically saves when we add this. So we're good on this section. Now, if we go into the import lists, I never honestly do anything here. If we go into the connect, I also never do anything here. Then the metadata. That's if you want to add metadata for like Kodi or stuff like that. I don't do this, so I ignore it. And then the source for the metadata is going to be this database, which is a site that provides that information. So we don't have to do anything. And then on the tagging, I usually never tag anything, so that's up to you if you want to do that. Then general is important. General is really important because this is where we have our configuration of the username and password and stuff like that. Here's the API key to the application. So we're going to be needing this to configure Prowler to give us our indexers. So that's the main thing that we need in here. So let's make sure that we copy this API key. And then we're going to work on Prowler to make sure that we can get those indexers added into here. All right, we're now in Prowler. And in Prowler, I'm going to go in here. I need to go into the settings, and I need to make sure that in my apps, I have an option here for Whisparr. So we're going to click on the plus sign, and we're going to see Whisparr here. So then we're going to select, it's going to be a full sync, and we're going to put here the IP of our NAS. So that's, in my case, 10.0.0.73, 10.0.0.73, but then the Whisparr server is an 8092, correct. And then the Prowler server, we're not going to touch that. And then we put the API key for our Whisparr. So now we test this. And we got a problem here. It says it was not able to connect to the application. So let's validate. Oh, I put the wrong IP, 7.3. There we go. And it says that the Prowler URL is invalid because we're using the wrong port. So that's 8087. And now let's try again. And there we go. Now we get the check mark. It's telling us that it is able to connect to everything. So we can save this. Now we have the Whisparr application here. So we can test all the applications, and then we can do a sync so that it sends all of those indexers that we have currently stored here in Prowler into the application. So eventually when we go back here into Whisparr and we go into indexers, we should see that this starts populating with those indexers from Prowler. So let's give it a little bit of time so that it starts passing that information into here. I'm going to keep on refreshing, and then once we see that they're starting to come in, then we're going to end this part here on the configuration. Alright, it took about 1 or 2 minutes, and now I see that it's starting to create those here from Prowler. So it's going to continue adding anything that is relevant here. So that is working. That's an important thing. So now we have configured everything that we needed here. The user interface, there's really nothing to do there. So now basically the application is ready to work. So in this case, this application is kind of interesting because it kind of uses sites to search for stuff. So in my opinion, it's not very useful for the type of content that people are looking for here, because I would say that it would make more sense to me, for example, to focus on a specific actor or actress, to look for the videos where that person is there or something like that. But that's not how they did it, so I'm not gonna be adding stuff because, you know, it's kind of sensitive images and stuff like that, so I don't want to get into trouble here. But then you would just basically add a new site, and then it gives you the options to add content based on that. So basically you have, you know, the typical adult sites that you can add here, and then it's going to pull the information that it needs for those that you add in there. I'm not going to be working on that. Like I said, that's very sensitive. YouTube is very touchy on those kind of subjects, so I'm just going to leave it here. The application is actually configured. At this point, you should just be able to add different sites, and it's going to work like any other R does, right? So that's going to be it for this one. I hope you liked it. Remember, I'm going to put the reference guide in the GitHub repository, so you are going to have access to the Docker Compose file there. So if you liked it, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. That's really important. That helps us grow and get exposure, and hopefully in the future get sponsorships and stuff like that. And that it will definitely help me focus more on the channel and create more quantity of good quality content for you. So that's really important. I noticed that very few people from the views are actually subscribed. It's like 15% or less. So if you like the content, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, please. And remember, I make all of these videos because of comments and requests that I get from people. Mainly, that's what I've been doing recently. So if you would like me to cover some application that you're interested in, or some kind of tool or something like that, feel free to write comments in the comment section below, because those, I review them, and then they usually be, you know, I add them to the queue and they become part of the videos that I'm going to be releasing. So always know that. And I try to reply to you as soon as possible. So I'm very responsive to your comments and your questions. And another thing is, you should have not received an ad on my video, because I am not monetizing the channel. That's on purpose. So that means that whenever I go through the effort of creating all of these videos for you, I'm actually making zero money out of it. So I'm entirely depending on your support. So that's why I shout out the people that donate to the channel, because that's really appreciated. That helps me to focus on the channel and stay, you know, grinding to give you the content that you want. So if you want to donate, there's a link in the description below to PayPal. You can use that. There's also a Bitcoin wallet address if you want to use it that way. I can accept Bitcoin donations too. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this one. I hope you liked it. I'll see you in the next video.